In the first two videos of this micro-module, we covered some basic tips for improving your written English and looked in more detail at style, sentence construction, and some useful vocabulary for your academic writing. In this third and final video of the micro-module, we'll give you some more general advice on writing style and look at some examples of common mistakes that you should try to avoid.
Have you read any good books recently, Professor Morton?
Actually, yes. I've been reading this really interesting book comparing the fall of the Byzantine and Aztec empires.
The Byzantine and Aztec empires? How does it do that?
Well, if I had to explain the whole idea of the book to you in a nutshell, the author, a professor of modern American literature at the University of St. Andrews named Eleni Kefala, wanted to explore how the Byzantines and the Aztecs responded through traditional folk poetry to the challenge posed to their societies by the advent of modernity, a concept that she describes as consisting of an early modernity beginning with the Spanish colonization of the Americas, which we would typically date to the year 1492, and a late modernity characterized by the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, studying the way in which the defeated Greeks and Nahuas employed the literary genres of the Byzantine thrinos, or lament, and the Mexica iconoquicatl, which also means lament in the Nahuatl language, to express their sense of grief at the loss of their respective states and to bridge the historical gap between the initial traumatic event and the sense of long-term cultural trauma that has come to define modern Greek and Cypriot school curricula, but is oddly absent from those of modern Mexico, which she explains as being as a result of the two societies' different heuristic approaches to the normalization of the relationship between conquered subaltern culture and the regime of the foreign conquering power, interestingly enough.
What?
What do you mean, what? Don't tell me I have to explain all that to you again. Ayya! There is a lot more to good academic writing than knowing grammatical rules and fancy intellectual-sounding vocabulary. You also need to pay attention to the style of your writing. My description of the book in the previous scene was perfectly grammatically correct, but the style was terrible. Your sense of English style is something that will improve over time. Remember, practice makes perfect. But here are some quick tips that you can start using in your academic writing right now. Less is more. The biggest problem with my description of the book is that it was far too long. Long sentences are hard to read and even harder to understand. Try not to write sentences of more than 2 or 3 lines at a time. It's even okay to write very short sentences of 1 line or less. Keep it flowing. Although I just said that short sentences are okay, try not to use too many of them together. This produces an effect known by the Italian musical term staccato, which describes the sound of lots and lots of short notes played together. Staccato sentences are quite annoying to read. Be active. English readers prefer active verbs to passive ones. The reason is that active verbs make for simpler sentences, whereas passive verbs require more words to support them and so make for more complicated sentences. This doesn't mean that you should never use passive verbs, but you should be careful not to use too many. Don't repeat yourself. It can be very easy to accidentally write the same thing twice, either because you forgot that you said it already, or because you have made a mistake while editing your writing. Always check to make sure that you aren't repeating yourself. Variety is the spice of life. English speakers like to have variation in vocabulary and writing style. Just as you should avoid repetition, it's also a good idea to vary your word choices and sentence structures to make your writing more enjoyable to read. Avoid pretension. Now, you're at a university writing an academic essay for a history professor. That means you have to use the most intellectual sounding words for everything, right? Wrong. You shouldn't try to sound intellectual just for the sake of it, as this makes it seem like you're just trying to show off. Before you use a fancy, clever sounding word, ask yourself if it is really necessary. Use up-to-date vocabulary. We know that most of you need to consult a dictionary from time to time. This is perfectly normal, but take care that you choose words that are in current English usage. It sometimes happens that a student uses some very old-fashioned words that they found in a dictionary, which then forces the professor to have to look that word up in the dictionary as well. Keep it simple, stupid. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, never forget the KISS principle. Now, I'm not calling you stupid, it's just an expression. If you write long, complex sentences, then you're increasing the likelihood of making mistakes. It is usually better to write shorter, simpler sentences, as this creates fewer opportunities for things to go wrong. As you become more confident in your writing ability, you will be able to make your sentences longer and more complex in the future. In this last part of Micro Module 1, I will present some of the most common mistakes that we see CUHK students make in their English writing. These errors are often the result of simple differences between Chinese and English grammar and sentence structure. If you can learn from these mistakes and avoid them yourself, then you'll be on the right track to improve your writing. Definite and indefinite articles, or a and the for short. This is probably the most common mistake that we see in students' work. If you are unsure about which kind of article to use, or whether you need to use one at all, ask yourself this. Are you referring to a specific thing or to a general concept? For a specific thing, use the. If you are referring to a generic example of something, then you should use a. In some cases, you might be referring to a general concept, in which case you might not need an article at all. For example, take the noun religion. Here are 3 ways you could use the article. Ancient China and Europe had different attitudes to religion. The religion of the Carolingian Empire was Christianity. Judaism was a religion of the ancient world. Nouns and adjectives. As we've said before, English has a clear distinction between nouns and adjectives. With only a few exceptions, most English nouns are different from their related adjectives. For example, Byzantium, the historical empire that I research, is a noun. Its adjective is Byzantine. You cannot use Byzantine as a noun or Byzantium as an adjective. A good way to spot an adjective is to look at its word ending. Words ending in ish, is, in, or an are usually adjectives. So if you look at the ending of Byzantine, you'll see that it is an adjective and not a noun. Verb tense. Whereas Chinese uses a combination of context and particle, English has 12 verb tenses. It is a good idea to learn what all of the verb tenses mean, as they all mean different things. Verb tenses tell us when an action took place and for how long. Here are the tenses of the verb to see, from the past to the future. Notice how the meanings differ. I had seen, I had been seeing, I saw, I was seeing, I have seen, I have been seeing, I see, I am seeing, I will have seen, I will have been seeing, I will see, and I will be seeing. Countable and uncountable nouns. Another important feature of English is that it distinguishes between things that can be counted, 1, 2, 3, and things that cannot. This has an effect on the plural forms of nouns. Normally, if you want to change a noun from a singular to a plural, you just add s to the end, right? Well, as we just saw, English likes to distinguish the general from the specific. If you are referring to a specific thing, like say a book, you just add s. You can count the number of books you see. Some nouns, like sheep, have irregular plural forms, but we won't talk about them right now. However, other things like water cannot be counted, so I cannot just add s. Or to talk about something that you're more likely to write about in an essay, let's take the word evidence. I often see students talk about evidences, but this is incorrect since the word evidence, like water, is uncountable. So, how do you pluralize an uncountable noun? The trick is to add another noun that you can count. Instead of 2 evidences, we say 2 pieces of evidence. Instead of 3 waters, we say 3 cups of water, and so on. Prepositions. English has many different prepositions and they all mean different things in different contexts. One of the most commonly misused prepositions that we see is the word since. Many students assume that this means the same thing as after, since they both denote things that happened chronologically after other things. However, the meaning is not the same. Take these two sentences. Number 1. Spanish has been spoken in Mexico since the expedition of Hernan Cortez. Now, sentence 2. Spain gained control of Mexico after the expedition of Hernan Cortez. In the first example, we're talking about something that is still true today, so we use since. In the second example, we're talking about something that was true but is not true anymore, so we use after. Conjunctions. These are words like and, but, or because that join junct clauses together, within a sentence, hence conjunction. However, they cannot join different sentences together, only clauses. Many students start sentences with a conjunction that refers to a previous sentence, but this is wrong. Conjunctions cannot refer back to previous sentences, so don't begin a sentence with and. We've now come to the end of the first micro-module of Academic English for Historians. We've covered a lot of ground, from general tips to improving your English and different styles, to more specific advice on sentence construction and common mistakes. However, the most important thing to remember is that there is only one real surefire way to get better at reading and writing in English: practice.